Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a place where self-care becomes part of your day, a space where you'll learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Kortni Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter, turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare of suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness, and my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The courting happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with others, and the infusion of science and so much more. You will learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 5. Today is a treat. I'm not sure if you can hear it in my voice. It is a special day because the love of my life is with me today. My fiance, I call him my sweetheart, but the world calls him Ken Lemon. And actually, it makes me think of one of my favorite songs from Martina McBride. Everyone calls him amazing. I just call him mine. He's smiling as I'm talking about this because I do this all the time at home. But Ken is a reporter for WSOC TV in Charlotte. He's also the vice president of broadcast for the National Association of Black Journalists. And he is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning journalist. And I share all of that because today we're going to talk about really our calling, our purpose, which speaks to, the introduction of Ken, but then also us. And so welcome, Ken, to the Courting Happiness podcast.
Thank you for having me. Is it Dr. Kortni Alston?
You can call me whatever. You can call me anything, sweetheart. I really appreciate Ken being here today, and I appreciate having this conversation with him. And it's exciting because he's been so supportive of my journey and so supportive of this podcast. So I'm so happy that he's here today. So today what we're going to do is we are going to talk about together, I should say.
Yes.
Our relationship, because we're not in this relationship alone, right?
No,
we're in this
not.
together. And then what positive psychology really has meant to us as a couple. And also, he doesn't know this. I want to know more about what makes him happy. So you should see his facial expression as I just mentioned that. He goes, what? What is she what does she mean? So to help us improve our lives in positive psychology, one of the things I will say that we focus on positive emotions, right? And they're good feelings that indicate human flourishing, because positive psychology is all about optimal human flourishing. And some of those positive emotions that we may feel are joy, gratitude, hope, inspiration, and love, which is why my love is here today also.
Yes.
And I've talked about this a lot in the podcast thus far. And I'm only, 5 episodes in, but I've talked about positive psychology in terms of gratitude. And so one of the things I've shared is a gratitude jar. That is a special jar between Ken and myself that Ken has bought for me. So we're going to talk about that in a bit. I'm kind of giving you guys a tease. So make sure you kind of stay tuned for that. But Ken, I'm curious, being engaged to me.
With an open mic?
Yeah. Wait a minute. Being engaged to me and really learning so much about positive psychology. How do you feel that it served you?
Well, it's really changed perspective. Like, one thing that's really amazing is my point of view that's changed now. So there is one, I call it the accent wall in our bedroom that happened whenever you became a part of our home here. And that accent wall is included with all these signs that say things like smile and dreams don't work unless you do, and tough times don't last, tough people do, kindness changes everything, happy in large words, be happy, be bright, be you. I mean, so, anytime that I feel like it's going to be a long day, the minute I wake up, the first thing I see is grateful and thankful, and kind of helps centers me. I like it. It's new and I appreciate it. Thank you.
So that's interesting you say that because, and by the way, Ken and I were in a long distance relationship. For some of you who may be new to the podcast, I've talked about this in previous podcasts, so make sure you definitely check out a previous episode or two. But what's so interesting is that we were long distance. We're nearly almost 300 miles away from each other. I was in Georgia. He was in here in North Carolina, I should say. But now we're living together.
Yes.
And we've been doing so for 2 years now. And I am a part of Ken's home, our home.
Yes.
And we share our home,
yes,
really, and with my future stepson. And so he's a college student. So it's the three of us here. And so it was interesting to hear that because when I moved into really their space, right? It's great to hear that it kind of increased some positive emotions with you, with just the decor of
the decor and then so much more. I always tell people, like, whenever before when you were visiting and you were living in Macon and you would come, I just felt like Julia's child when you got here. So like you and Matt were both here. It's like, I gotta cook something. I need to cook something. I need to cook. So I was trying to do happy things, make a happy environment. And the really, really later on I learned messed up thing about it is I'm working to cook and making these meals and thinking, oh, I'm really making this great. And this chick is an amazing cook. And so she bites her tongue for several months before jumping into the kitchen and just cranking out, better stuff than I did in half the time. So.
No, I think we teach each other. Do you know what I mean? Because I've learned, it's interesting because Ken has shared recipes with me. And then what's been so great, and I never thought about this until you and I got together, is that I share my mother's recipes with you. And so even as we speak right now, the home is kind of like, is being really kind of filled with this beautiful, nice and aroma, guys. And by the way, I didn't cook. And Ken cooked, but what's so beautiful is that he cooked my late mother's chicken and rice recipe. Yes. So I think what's so beautiful is that there's been this mutual exchange for the both of us of sharing dynamics of terms of your life and sharing the experiences that you have incorporated within your family structure, meaning, with your son and with, friends and family. And then also how the two of you, meaning, with my future stepson and me, right, and what that incorporates. So I think we've kind of done that for each other as I kind of go on, and I'm kind of going off on a tangent, guys, because by the way, I haven't eaten yet. So I'm looking forward to having it. But I think that speaks to us. But I love what you shared because it speaks to so many meaningful experiences. Because one of the things that's important in positive psychology is creating these meaningful experiences, what we get in terms of having these positive relationships with one another. And so, Ken does this incredible job. And I'm just not saying this because, guys, you guys know I talk about Ken all the time. I talk about him in the classroom with my students. Everybody knows. Talk about him on the podcast. But I think those are good signs, right?
I mean,
we are engaged.
Depends on what you say.
I mean, they're all wonderful things. They're all positive things.
Good.
But what I love so much about you, right, is the fact that when all three of us are together, and then also when the two of us are together, but I think it speaks to that in terms of the holistic approach of being a blended family, right? That you really work to create these meaningful experiences. And so I feel that you do them through food. And I feel that you do through how you set up the food, right? And so and I'm curious because how does that serve you when that happens? Because it sounds like to me, I'm just speculating that it kind of, that that brings up a lot of positive emotions for you, just the whole, I don't know how you kind of like orchestrate
Well, I mean,
that.
really, that comes from you, because like I'm from a family. We had a household of 7, and so the table was only set on Sunday. There was so many kids to feed that, when the food was done, you grab your plate and you hit the pots. And so when it was just my son and I living here, that's how we did it. We grabbed our plates and we went to the pot. Food's done. Come on over to the stove and pick up your food. And so it was actually you and your parents who had a catering business, and you talked about presenting and presentation and everything, and then you brought these great Temptations pieces into the house
I love
that are
Temptations,
beautiful.
by the way.
And and you start plating stuff, and you would turn a dish upside down to act as a platform for another dish that sat on top of it, and so there were tiers of food. And so I looked at that and I went, wow, that's nice. And then I realized that was something that you were accustomed to. That was a piece of home for you. And I really want this to be home as well. And so what I tried to do then is not only just take the cooking that made me happy to be able to feed you and Matt, but also to take the presentation that was a part of your life and your home, and infuse that into what I was doing. And so I now enjoy it. It's just, plating the food, and every now and then I'll, take pictures of it and put it on Instagram, or take pictures of cooking the food and put it on Instagram, making sure that once it hits a plate, that there's that good look. And that's where that came from. It actually came from the both of us.
So, and I love that you shared that, because, by the way, I chuckled while Ken was speaking, because he is like our resident person at home that archives every moment. And so when you take those pictures, right, you're kind of archiving those moments.
Yeah.
But when I look back on them, I really think, and I really treasure what you just shared with me in regards to the fact that they were things that you learned from me, and then that you kind of blended in. And I think that's so important, because Ken and I, granted, during the intro of my podcast, I talk about being a widow. So I've been a widow, but during I think one of my first 2 episodes of my podcast, especially episode number 1, I talked about being divorced. And Ken and I are both divorced. Mm-hmm. And so I think when you're in a family scenario where you're creating this, is it fair to say a happy blend, right? When you're blending families, mm-hmm. I think it's so great that when you're incorporating elements of the other person, so there's a level of inclusion.
Yeah.
So I love that you've done that. He really has done a great job in terms of making sure that that I feel mm-hmm. very much at home here, while we are actually still also thinking about and working on our dream home.
Right.
Which is exciting, which he's looking at me, because he's actually beginning to design the dream home, everyone. And he goes, hey, when are we going to talk about designing more elements of it? And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm still looking at YouTube, and I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like. But it's been great, because it speaks to really the marriage, right? Yeah. And so the marriage of us kind of coming together in that blend together, which is great. So let's talk about another element of positive emotion. So I always tell people during speaking engagements how you can, positive emotions are really integral in terms of our well-being. You can think about elements that are made of happen in your past, your present, and your future. And a great practice in doing that is practicing gratitude. Ken has done this incredible, for those of you who have listened before know that he's done this incredible work in regards to creating a gratitude jar. Mm-hmm. So I love notebooks, guys. I'm surrounded by notebooks as we speak. I love them, but there's something about a gratitude jar I love, because it's so visual. You get to see, the cards kind of flowing and growing and blooming, so to speak. But what's so interesting is that literally Ken has taken it up a notch. And so I say that because he knew I was practicing gratitude. I shared that practicing gratitude. Mm-hmm. He saw the gratitude jars in my home. Every place I lived, I've always created a new jar based on a new location. Mm-hmm. But what was so great is that you created a gratitude jar when we were in a long distance relationship, and you decided to write down all of the things that you were grateful for in regards to our relationship. And it's so interesting, guys. I'm like, I'm a happiness scholar, and I'm like, I never even thought about giving that as a gift.
Yeah.
How did you come up with that concept?
Well, there's actually a couple of folds. Number one, the idea came from you. So that's first and foremost how I came up with that idea. It's not something that I knew about before I met you and decided, well, let's do this. And I knew that it was something that was important to you. And the other thing was, it was a long distance relationship. So, what happens when you're in love and you're in a long distance relationship is that there are periods of the day when you're thinking about that other person, and you can text them, you can call them, but you kind of feel like that doesn't always do it. And so what I did is, when I had a free moment, because you had a job too, and I had a job. So we had jobs and we texted back and forth. But when I had a moment, what I would do is I took an extra pad around with me. I would just jot down my thought, what I was thinking about you in that moment. And then I would pull apart that piece of paper and I would put it in the jar. And so my idea was, whenever I saw you and presented the jar, it wasn't just a gratitude jar for what you are now. This is all the holes in the days that I've been thinking about you between the last time that you and I spoke, so that you knew. And I told you, when we did this one special day when she came and visited, and there were three things that I was trying to communicate, and I wanted to communicate with that I'm always thinking about you. I'm always thinking about. Well, this was the tangible way to show that I'm always thinking about you. And sometimes it was, the lyrics of a song of yours that kind of stuck in my head, and I might write the lyrics of the song. And then sometimes it might be something about your family that really impressed me, and then something about you individually. So not every time was I love you, it's great, because no matter how much you love somebody, that's not the only thing that you think about when you think about how much you love them. You think about how much you appreciate them and how many different ways you appreciate them. And so it felt really good to put that together. And I've never made a gratitude jar. The first time I ever put something together, I pull it together and I made these little things, and I presented it to you. And it was really saying to you, these are all the ways that you have moved me, and you've been a part of my life. You've been there, even though we were 300 miles apart.
So interesting. I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my God, that's so beautiful. And because it's beautiful. I'm like, oh, and it's one of the many reasons why I'm so in love with you. Yeah. Because a friend of mine who's the beautiful Ardinia Myrick, we talk about Ken all the time. And we always talk how Ken wears kindness, which is a good look. It's a great look, by the way. But what I loved about what you shared is, I'm looking at you and I'm seeing, you're smiling, and you are kind of like this light in your eyes, is sharing it.
And I'm talking to you.
Well, so. I love you too. This is going to turn into like a love letter podcast. But what I'm curious, how did it make you feel? Because I'll say, it's clear how it made me feel to a degree, because I've talked about it so much during so many podcasts. Mm-hmm. But I want to know, how did it make you feel doing that?
Well, it made me feel a couple of things. Number one, it made you feel closer. And that was the amazing thing for me, is that, I could say to myself, number one, you're part of this moment in my life right now. Jot it down. This is what the moment is. I can put it in that jar, and I can also say, now I'm going to give this to you. And so it made you feel closer now and later, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It does.
It made you feel closer to me, which is important when you're like, 4 hours on right after work on Friday evening, jumping in the car, going 4 hours, guys. One way, and getting there sometimes 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, depending on what the workday was like, and then leaving on Sunday afternoon. And so it made you feel closer. It made me feel better. It made me feel like I could have an impact on your life. I can make you smile. I could do something for you. And I'll be honest with you, when I think about it, those were a lot of the happier periods of my work. My work days were better. Everything was well, and it really kind of set a tone for the day. There was less time to think about how many ways the days go wrong. And from being a journalist that, things can change on the drop of the hat 4 times a day. But when I had a moment, I stopped and I scribbled down anytime I thought about it, because the fear was I'll forget it. If I don't write it down, I'll forget it. And sometimes I would take a notebook and I would just say, I'm going to write all these notebooks until this notebook page is filled, and then I'm going to rip them all out and I'm going to put them in there. And it just made me feel better doing it. And it made me appreciate the moment that I was in and the moment that I was going to have. And it really made 300 miles feel like right around the corner.
That's interesting you say that. It made you feel closer, because I would tell you, like, for me, because of the distance, because I would miss you terribly after Sunday. Sunday was the days that we would leave each other. And we talk about that to this day now, since we're living together and we're under the same roof. But Sundays, we just hated them.
Yeah.
Like, because, although Sunday's a great day, but it's like, but it wasn't great for us because it was a day that either one of us would hit the road.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was back in Macon, Georgia, where I lived at the time, and we were not like physically together in each other's spaces. We would talk every night, guys.
Mm-hmm.
But when we were physically not together, I would go into the jar. I remember one time being in my room, I went into the jar and I said, oh gosh, I'm just going to go into the jar and just read some of the things that he shared. And then I would literally curl up with the gratitude jar.
Oh.
And it made me feel as if you were there. So it's interesting that you said you felt close writing them, because I literally felt like closer to you, even though we weren't physically together at that moment, that I literally felt closer to you. And it actually was great, because I thought, oh my God, because we're still, we're at the beginning of falling in love, right? And it made me not only treasure our relationship, I will say the things that you had written down, it made me value where we were. It made me value where we were going.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were times I think there was one that you mentioned my mother in
Mm-hmm.
it, and you talked about what you would like to see with us in the future as relates to my late mom, rituals that she loved, and then all these different other elements. So it was an interesting dynamic. I think it's actually I would highly recommend it to any couple out there, right? Because it was wonderful. It was interesting. It was a different type of love letter.
Yeah.
Because it was, and guys, it's so interesting. Here we are, we're living under the same roof. And that gratitude jar is in our room.
Yeah.
Like, I cherish it. It's on the bookshelf. It's, behind every speaking engagement I do, anything I do virtually, is right there, right behind me. It's never too far away. And it speaks to how much I treasured it. So it's not simply something I just treasured because we were far away from each other. We're in a long distance relationship, but I really treasure the meaningfulness of it all. So it was a really deep, meaningful activity.
See, and that's amazing, because when you gave me yours, I looked at a couple of them and I couldn't look anymore, because she gave me this beautiful jar. And instead of so my notes were, I went out and I bought a notebook, or I pulled a notebook somewhere. I ran over to a store and I grabbed a notebook, just have a spare that I can write just on this. And I would rip the pages out. But hers were from stationery, Superman stationery.
I made it themed.
Yes. And so, because back then she always said, she called me her Superman. And so all of the notes were on one side on a clear sheet of paper, and the other side had Superman on them, some sort of Superman emblem, Superman himself. And she put them in there, and I read the first couple. And I don't know how deeply I got in those, because I know sometimes what we would do on Sunday mornings, if we had one, we would go in and read a little bit while we were together. And I don't know that I read much going home, because I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I couldn't read it. I just felt like, I just treasured it so much, because it was like holding on to your heart. And so I didn't feel like, disturbing it. I was like trying to be very ginger with it. So
that's interesting. So it's funny, because for me, I couldn't stop reading it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, but it's interesting to say that, because you and I may have had different responses, but still the feelings were the same. Right? Because they increased our positive emotions. We felt connected to each other. We we felt, it's so interesting. No, even though we were nearly 300 miles away, it felt like the person was there.
Yeah.
Granted, I wanted you there, right? But that was the next best thing of me actually having you there. And we felt the same way in terms of each other. So it was maybe challenging for you to read it. For me, I couldn't. It was like, hey, I'm addicted to chocolate, guys. So it was like chocolate. So you can't stop with just one. You try, but it's like, oh my goodness, look at the Valentine's Day candy is gone. That's me. No judgment. But it's interesting that you say that. So how has gratitude served you, you feel?
Well, I mean, it's a point of view kind of thing. And so it really kind of changes your point of view. You don't take for granted. I'll tell you one thing, and we speak on this theme right now because it's kind of running. Like Sunday afternoons are wonderful. They're nice. And then, we're
recording
not
this on a Sunday, by the way.
We're not perfect. So every now and then on a Sunday, we may bicker at each other, and then I go, but at least nobody's going home.
Yeah.
Like
true.
At least nobody's leaving today.
Yeah.
And like that changes the day. And that's a form of gratitude that comes along with being in that long distance relationship and then being together. That really, really kind of, it changes your perspective. So after saying something like that, it really doesn't matter much what we were talking about before, what the bickering was about before. It's like, yeah, this is a moment I didn't have. Like, we didn't have anything with each other. Sometimes I think you cheated once or twice and stayed till like 6 o'clock in the evening. I'm like, you need to go home. I don't want you driving the dark. You need to go home.
Yeah.
But for the most part, after 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, it was over.
That's true.
And you would wake up on a Sunday and you would think,
that's it.
This is the last breakfast. Oh, okay. This is that's the last hug. This is the last kiss. Oh, and then you get on the road and you're on the phone with each other the whole time. 3-4 hours on the phone with each other. But that's a piece of appreciation.
Yeah, very true.
But what it does is it immediately changes the way you see the day and the way you receive the day and how the day receives you. Yeah. Because if you approach it with that positive mindset, then what you get back for, what you start to see are positive things. Just like people this is an amazing thing with new cars. Like if you ever bought a new car and then suddenly looked around and go, I didn't realize how many other people drive a car like mine. I didn't realize there were so many Honda Civics out here. I didn't know. Well, they were always there. The thing that changed is you feel so happy about being in a Civic that now you see them everywhere. You didn't notice them before. Yeah. Before they may have been the guy that cut you off. And now there's another person with a Civic. So that's just the same way that having a positive moment really changes a day. You have that moment where you go, instead of looking, something else went wrong, you go, this is another reason to be happy.
Absolutely.
Oh, isn't this amazing? Oh, we're sitting down and eating together. Oh, let's watch a show together. Let's sit down and watch a show together instead of, it's a change in the way you receive it and the way it hits you.
Yeah, very true. It's interesting you say that because Sundays were so daunting.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. We're actually recording this on Sunday, guys, because even though, the podcast is released every Thursday, by the way. But of course, Ken is going to head back to work tomorrow and he's been off all week. So I've been lucky to have him all week. But so Sunday, which this would have been like the worst day ever for us when we're in a long distance relationship, because at this time of day, one of us would have been on the road or back already and now on the phone with each other, opposed to now we're like under the same roof, we're together. And it's interesting. It made me think about the value of our relationship in jars. I don't know if you ever thought of it this way. I just thought about it.
No.
Because so you gave me a gratitude jar. I give you a gratitude jar. And then on Sundays, I would pack a jar to give to Matt.
Yeah.
So what was so important for me is really building the relationship with my future stepson. So
You know,
I would make these cookies for him. And so the running joke in our relationship, I used to give the cookies to Ken, and I would say, "Hey, don't you go and eat my stepson's cookies." And sometimes he would joke and say a dog ate it or something of that nature. But we'll no judgment zone. But it was so important for me to make sure that he was a part of that dynamic as you and I are building as part of that dynamic. And what I love so much about Ken is that, for him, it was important for my father to have, this special place in our dynamic. And although, my father, like, it's not just Ken, it's the only person to think about. My dad, by the way. I mean, I'm always thinking about my dad is amazing. I admire my parents, and I miss my mother every day. And I'm so grateful that I have my dad. But I thought it was great that we could literally talk about how, jars have served us in this relationship in terms of gratitude, cookies, and so much more, but I treasure that. I treasure that level of inclusion that we had.
And most of those cookies made him home.
Most of them
made it home.
Hey guys, he said most of them. So let's talk about some more in terms of positive relationships. Or in this case, correction, positive emotions, and let's lead into positive relationships. Okay. I believe in qualifying. You know this. Yes. I believe in qualifying relationships. I simply don't say relationships are great for our well-being. I say positive relationships are great for our well-being. What I really treasure a lot about and so in love with in terms of Ken, it's like I said earlier, he literally wears kindness. He is that person. He's shaking his head. He's very modest, but hey, I'm not, in terms of letting people know that he is a very kind soul. He's a kind person. He's a great person. But one of the things that I will tell you this is how empathetic he is, and how we have this great rapport in terms of sharing information. We're really are good friends. Yeah. We're good friends are in love with each other. It's really a wonderful thing. He's laughing at me right now as I share this. Yeah. But what I love so much also is having data points, having these experiences. The researcher in me will call it data points. Yeah. But the fiance in me, the woman who's madly in love with you, says we're having these experiences. Yes. And so I will tell you this. So in positive relationships, what's integral in terms of our well-being is you can have laughter and joy with a person. Of course, as you guys can hear this with Ken and I interacting, but then also it's about accomplishment. And what I love so much about that is in terms of sharing those accomplishments. Right. One of the most meaningful experiences I've had, I think it was before the pandemic. That was way before the pandemic, was we were in Nashville. And it was spring. I remember that. I can't remember the month. February. Okay. We had a great time in Nashville. And because I'm a huge country music fan, and we went to the Opry, we actually invited my friends, had a great time with them. I didn't want to leave them because I just loved them so much. But I also was excited because that night, we actually were in downtown Nashville for the Emmy Awards. And I got a chance to see Ken win his third Emmy Award. And for me, all the years he and I have been together thus far, he's always talked about his 2 other Emmys that he's won. Yes. And I've always have kind of, it's been great to hear those stories, right? I'm like, oh gosh, it's wonderful. Like, oh wow, you've won 2 Emmys. And I tell my students, because I also teach, journalism, and I'm a professor of journalism, and I sharing, these incredible stories in regards to Ken getting an Emmy. But this time it was different because I had a chance to be there. I had a chance to witness you literally walk on stage, see you with your colleagues who are amazing people, by the way. Yeah. And love the fact that not even arm's length away was an incredible colleague that he has, who's a morning anchor for the station. She's amazing. Brittany Johnson, just adore her. She's just a phenomenal person. And so I felt so honored that here I am. I'm friends with one of your coworkers who's an amazing being, and then I'm surrounded by your incredible group because you guys have a great sense of family. It's one of the things I loved about working in a newsroom. But I was drawn to seeing you actually go on stage and grab your Emmy Award. And so for me, that was so meaningful. And it was different unlike any other time she told me, like, hey, that's right. Let me tell you about the time I got my Emmy. And I'm just like, oh, yes. And I'm like all enamored. But it was different because I was there.
Yeah.
I was there to see it. I was there to help celebrate you. And it was just an incredible experience.
It was different for me. And I remember that day a little bit differently than you remember that day. I'll tell you my version of that day. It was different for me because that was the first time I received one. And you were there with, like, I was there to get it. And you were there with me. The others, they, came back, my dear friend Alexis, last one I got, she went and she brought mine back for me.
That's true.
So, but that day was different for me because I looked at what happened before then. Number one, we went out to dinner with Kortni's dear friends, Christine Eschenfelder, Dr. Eschenfelder, and her husband, and Dr. Stephanie Dean, who she didn't have a chance to see.
And
the other
Dan
thing,
Eschenfelder, by
the
way.
yes, Dan. Yes, Dan. And we also ended up in a place that you didn't expect we would be.
Oh my
so when we went out to meet,
nine.
What I was doing was, Kortni's a big country music fan. And so when I started booking hotels, the guest hotel for the Emmys was booked and it was very expensive anyhow. So I even with the rate, the special rate they gave us, I started looking at hotels near the Grand Ole Opry. And the place that we went to meet at, the place that we went to meet had a Opry theme or Opry name along with it. But I don't think Kortni understood that we were going to be right there at the Opry. And so I told her, I said, look, let's get there a little bit early so we can spend some time together, just you and I, before we meet up with everyone else. And we got there a little early, and I remember the walk. We parked and we walked. You still didn't realize the Opry. I mean, there were signs everywhere, and
I was in
this
denial.
Is good.
I think it was like my inner being trying to make sure I wouldn't explode. Because guys, I'm a huge country music fan, huge Dolly Parton fan, by the way. But anyway.
Oh my goodness. We went over the walkway, crossed over the other side. She looks over and she goes, I believe that's the Opry. That's the Grand Ole Opry, isn't it? And I'm like, it might be. And we foolishly thought, again, this was pre-COVID life, before 2020 went to heck in a handbasket. We foolishly thought there may be an opportunity for us to take a tour beforehand, but there were so many people already in line for tours that we couldn't do that. And the tour took a little bit too long and our friends were coming. We had a great time with your friends. At one point, really, I had to remind myself, hey, we have to get up and go and get dressed and go for the Emmys because, and that really felt great. Before we even got dressed and got there, I felt like the day was perfect. It was already good.
Day. Yeah, it was a beautiful day. It's interesting you say that because you're right. I was in denial. I think also I was so busy with so many elements of my day, and I was so busy thinking about Friends and the Emmy, seeing you get it because I already claimed it. I knew Kim was going to get an Emmy award that night. I didn't say I knew, and so my thoughts were, okay, that's great. And then what was serious icing on the cake, and I go, whoa, I'm like, oh, by the way, this is Opryland.
Yeah.
Like, oh, by the way, you're at the Grand Ole Opry. And what was so meaningful to me is the fact that one of the last dates my parents had before my mother died, they went to the Opry together.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh my gosh, I would have never imagined, because my mother died 4 years ago. And literally months before Ken and I met and started talking.
Yeah.
And so Ken never met my mother.
Mm-mm.
And what was so interesting is that I felt how my worlds had the chance to kind of come together with having you share that experience, because my family and I, we love country music. My dad went through college on a music scholarship, and our family home is surrounded by instruments, and I love all things musicals. Ken has had to deal with that, and me singing Frozen on
50 times a day.
50 times a day increases my positive emotions, by the way. but I love the fact that we had that experience together. So it was you're right, it was so meaningful on so many different levels, from three amazing people
Yeah.
that
Great
we have.
folks.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
Dr. Stephanie Dean. Of course, you guys know I've talked about her great deal. She and I host the Thriving in Toxicity podcast together. She is incredible. And then uh, Dr. Christine Estenfelder and Dan Estenfelder. They are just an amazing couple. And I hate that Stephanie's husband couldn't join us that day because he's an amazing being as well. But it was just great.
It was amazing.
It was phenomenal.
Was
so as you can tell by hearing Ken and I share, you can hear a couple of things in this dynamic, right? We're talking about levels of positive emotions. We're talking about what we're grateful for, because certainly was grateful for that day. And then we're also talking about the value of positive relationships with each other. And I will also share with the three people that we had dinner with, lunch with that day. My friends are extremely empathetic, loving, warm, generous, kind. I could go on, but the podcast is only but a certain amount of time. They're just amazing people.
And you know what? I needed that. That really changed my day, because that night I was actually up for 5 Emmys. And the one I won was the 5th one in line. So I 4 times before they hit the stage and no Emmy. So it was still a win-win day. And in every sense of the word, it was a win-win day. I mean, I had a wonderful experience with, I was so excited about the Emmys. I remember that I stood up and I told everybody at my table at the Emmys, I was like, who wants drinks? I'm going to go buy drinks. And nobody took me up. And Kortni took me up. And she's like, oh, I want this. And so, I get in line. I get in line to go get drinks. And I spark up a conversation with another guy who happened to be there. And he had a Charlotte connection. He said, oh, yeah, I used to live in Charlotte. And, and I go up to buy my drink for myself and for Kortni. I forgot my wallet. My wallet was gone. This guy and I had such a good conversation for about 5 minutes. His wife was an anchor at a station in North Carolina along the coast, and he started to buy my drinks. And I was like, no, don't do it. He insisted. He says, what we really need to do is we need to learn to lean on each other a little bit more. So he purchased my drinks, and I found out that he was one of the coordinators for the Carolina Panthers football team.
Oh my God.
That I had no idea. He's a former coordinator, and he, while he was in North Carolina, he found a woman that he loved, fell in love with, and then we end up. So, I mean, there was so many positive things that happened before the first time someone said my name as a nominee for something, that it was a great night even before then. And while I was happy to win the Emmy, I was really excited to be able to take home the statuette, grateful to take pictures and to be with you with that moment and share that. And then to hear that Christine and Dan and Stephanie were watching from home as this whole thing, that really felt great. But that day was made many times over before the ceremony even began.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's interesting because as Ken and I are sitting at the table during the Emmys, and Christine and Stephanie are texting me, and they're literally are watching it live as it's happening. And I literally, even though they weren't sitting at our table, they weren't there, I felt their presence there. Yeah. So you're absolutely right in terms of, the beauty of that day. And you talk about, here you are meeting a stranger, right? Who is clearly not a stranger to being kind. This guy seemed to be an incredible being,
oh my
right?
God. Yeah.
So it says so much about the value of positive relationships in terms of people that you already know.
Yes.
People that you're in love with, and strangers, literally perfect strangers.
Perfect strangers.
And he was a perfect stranger.
Yeah.
I want to ask you another question before we head off, and I'm enjoying this conversation that Ken and I are having. It is great. He's smiling a lot, so I'm glad. I guess he's happy that he's talking to me about this. But I'm curious, because since we're talking about the Emmys and we're talking about accomplishment, we're talking about the value in terms of that level, in terms of support. How important, I should say, is it to have a purpose-driven life and what that means in terms of our relationship. How does that serve your being? Because one thing about Ken is that Ken is truly a person that is of service, in terms of being a journalist and sharing information, making sure the community is informed. And one of the things I truly value is that job because I did it. And I love and respect journalists. Is one of the reasons why a big part of my area is making sure I serve them in terms of their well-being too.
Mm-hmm.
But then also Ken is a person that is serving community and serving other journalists too. How important is being purpose-driven in terms of our relationship?
Well, you know what? I think balance is so important. So while I have so much purpose with you, if I didn't have purpose outside of you, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I can't help but have purpose.
I'm sorry, I caught you off guard there. I'm sorry.
And while I have purpose with my son, I also have purpose outside of that, and that is a part of, I think it's a part of character, but it's also a part of growth, and seeking opportunity to be of service to a greater community, and I think having purpose in everything, I mean all things, really serves an individual. One thing that it does is it helps to mark where you're going. And I tell this to mentees all the time. It's like, you don't worry about how big your dreams are. They're just steps away. You just take the steps, you target the dream, and you take the steps between here and there, and you're there. As long as you don't mind running to get there sometimes if you need to run longer. But being able to do some of the things. So there are nights when I come in, I'll have 2 and 3 meetings a night for a week or 2 or 3 sometimes, leading up to convention. That was the case. And, phone calls and discussions. And I haven't had as much time to do work with mentees, but I just had a discussion with a mentee while I'm helping my son prepare for an exam that he has coming up. And we're talking back and forth about anthropology. But being able to do that makes you a well-rounded person. The worst thing in the world to do is to be a sitcom character in life or in a relationship. And that sitcom character in life is not to say that you're funny, ha, but it is to say that when I'm not on stage speaking to the character that everybody wants to hear, or being the character everybody wants to hear, I'm invisible.
Yeah. And
that's what happens to characters in a sitcom. Characters in a sitcom don't exist, don't do anything, don't have anything when they're not there. When they're not on stage, when they don't have that presence before you. And that was so true, particularly when I was growing up. Characters would pop in and pop off, and they're here for the laugh. And then once you get your chuckle, they're gone and they're off. But filling out your life means being not invisible, particularly to yourself and the things that you need to do. When you're self-satisfied, you're more attractive. And that's the truth. When you're self-satisfied, you're also a better service to other people, because if I'm not working to be fulfilled in another area, trying to help fulfill home is going to be difficult.
Well, I will tell you this. I am so grateful. And when you said satisfied, I did think of Hamilton.
Me too.
For those of you who are huge Hamilton fans, of course, you guys know I love musicals at this point. But I am just so grateful for you and so grateful for this time that we had. And it's so amazing. It has gone by very fast. And we talked
a lot of it too.
We talked for an extended period of time, normally than I usually do, more than normally I do. Right. But I want to thank you so much, Ken, for being here today and for sharing all your experiences. I got to tell you guys something. I want to hear from you. I want to know, how do you feel about Ken and I talking about levels of our relationship and what that's mean in terms of positive psychology? Because one of the things that I really treasure is an amazing book that is called Happy Together. And I love to be able to talk about that in the future, but incorporating my fiance, he's looking at me like, but I want to hear from you all in regards to, what do you think? And for you to be able to share that, you definitely have to join the Courting Happiness podcast community on Facebook. We cannot wait to see you there. Thank you so much, Ken, for being with us today. And I'm so grateful for your love and support, because he is a big reason why this is even a reality. And I love you for that. So thank you so very much. I really am.
Thank you.
So I would love to hear more from you all. I'm so sorry that time is up, but join the Courting Happiness podcast community once again on Facebook. Don't forget, it's Courting with a K, right? And are you ready to spread happiness like Kit and I do within our relationship? Well, hope you subscribe and share this podcast. Plus, build your commitment to well-being, starting with you and really developing that domino effect with the people in your life, family, friends, co-workers, and those phenomenal positive relationships that you have as well. Remember, a new episode is released every Thursday. Continue to commit to your courting happiness journey. I want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. I can't wait to see you next week.